Hi guys, welcome back. Eric's UK here for another vid. This is the second half of the video I posted earlier about campaign settings for D&D. This time I thought I would talk about what I like as opposed to the settings that I covered earlier. I don't like settings that have certain sort of I don't know what you'd call it, pre-built sort of like plots. So I don't like ones where you've got evil has won, or the rise of the dead, or this sort of thing. There's always something that seems to be totally blown out of proportion, and it just wouldn't interest me at all. I like settings which are fairly generic. There's no overarching plot, there's no overarching story. You're just given a kind of Dark Ages medieval setting and you are left to run with it. Now there's always got to be something more to it than that, but I don't think you need much more than that. Not for me anyway. An example being one that I mentioned before, which was a homebrew setting I made about 20 years ago called Traken. And Traken I really liked. I only ended up running a handful of campaigns with it. But it initially started off as basically I'd drawn a map of Europe, I suppose, and basically added some high mountains here and there, and basically turned it. That's probably not the best way to put it. The majority of the main body of what would be Europe was a sizable kingdom. I forget the name now. That had like five or six major cities. The idea being that people did live in towns and villages here and there, but the prevalence of monsters and what have you meant that people would crowd together. So you had cities with a much higher population than you would probably normally find in a D&D game, and it was ruled by a council, and each one of these council members ruled one of the cities, and they came together at certain points in order to do the bureaucracy and run the country. Spain essentially was a unpleasant nation that was female dominated, somewhat sexist, but going back 20 years I was only like about 18, so they were meant to be like one of the villains for the piece. And then United Kingdoms and sort of like the Scandinavian bits were Albion, which were Celtic barbarian types. The races were slightly different. In some cases, dwarves were more like lawful evil Klingons from Star Trek. They were very much into their battle and honourable combat and drinking heavily. I basically took the typical dwarven archetype, added a darker element to it. Elves were basically Native Americans. The kingdoms used to be theirs, but now they were driven into a small area to the southeast. Otherwise, the races were normal. The backstory to the whole campaign was that somewhere in the distant past, another race had achieved sentience on the planet, which was actually a race called the Thran, who were the Thrax, not the Thran. It's magic. The Thrax, who were basically precursors to the Thrycreen, who were like mantis peoples. And they developed a highly advanced technological society and then eventually just departed into space and left the planet for those who would come after them. And while there weren't things like laser guns or anything like that laying around, there were remnants and ruins of that ancient civilization dotted here and there. One of them was, the encounter I remember once, was a series of regular stone pillars that stretched across a series of plains, and while they never quite fathomed it out, it was in fact the remains of a monorail. The only other sort of like change I made to the setting, as opposed to normal D&D, was that dragons could be any alignment. So just because it was a gold dragon you saw didn't mean it wasn't chaotic evil, or chaotic neutral, or true neutral, or whatever. Basically dragons were dragons, and you didn't trust them just because they were metallic or what have you. But dragons, pardon me, the dragons were part of something which I think I ripped from RuneQuest, I'm not sure. The idea being that these huge mountain chains that existed were actually dragons. that had fallen asleep, and the earth and everything had piled up over them over the millennia, and they were all fast asleep beneath the mountains. And that dragons that the characters and people encountered in the everyday world were in fact the dreams given form of these dragons. I did eventually expand to the eastern side of things, and I made it a bit more unlike Earth. It didn't go off into like a Mongolia and then a Russia and India or anything like that. But the whole point was you had this setting. Pardon me, I don't know what's with the cough at the moment. You didn't have anything like an overarching something. It didn't need it. And every time I look at a campaign setting I see online, homebrew ones that people have posted, or I look at ones that have been published and I haven't seen before, they all seem to have some big hook to sort of like lure you in. And I think, as I mentioned in the other video, with the Galarian campaign setting, that seems to be its problem, if it has one, in that its hook is that if you want to run a certain sort of game, there's an area for it. Which seemed really nice when I first got it, but the more I read through the book and the more I look at it, the more I just kind of want to go, well, actually, it doesn't really work. But that's another topic. So for homebrew settings, I'm trying to fathom out what to do for another one, which is kind of what partly got me into talking about the campaign settings anyway. But it's coming up with something, because I suppose 20 years ago I could run something that was generic and it would last 3-4 campaigns. If I wanted to come up with something that would be reusable time and time again, I think it needs something else. That's the problem. So I'm going to give that a good ponder. But I'm not going to drag on, because this has gone on for like 7 or 8 minutes now. So essentially, boiling it down, my thoughts on campaign settings should be that they are more generic than they are. You don't need an overarching hook, you just need an interesting world, and I don't think that hook has to be the thing that makes it interesting. I think if that is your problem, if that is the case, then that is a problem with the setting. But saying that, everybody's got to find a campaign setting that fits them and their players and their play group in general. I would really like to hear some of your campaign settings that you've made, homebrew ones, or what you've changed to others, to established ones, or even if you've got a campaign setting that you run or have used I haven't mentioned, I probably don't even know about. I would be quite interested to hear about it. Alright, until next time, this is Eric UK signing off. Happy gaming.